All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, wherever you happen to be. I'm Jean Wallace. I'm the Deputy Commissioner and Chief Engineer for the Minnesota Department of Transportation and also the Vice Chair for the AASHTO Committee on Performance-Based Management. And on behalf of CPBM Chair Crystal Sidafantos and the entire CPBM leadership team, I would like to warmly welcome all the panelists and attendees to today's webinar. The Transportation Performance Management Technical Service Program, sponsored by AASHTO and in cooperation with the FHWA, is thrilled to co-sponsor this Transportation Performance Management TPM webinar series. This is our 21st bi-monthly webinar. We aim to support the broad TPM community by sharing lessons learned, sharing ideas and knowledge with the transportation performance management community. Today, we'll be exploring the intersection of risk, resilience, and performance management. And because we'll be moving quickly and we have a lot of ground to cover, we ask that you enter any questions you may have for the speakers in the chat, and they will answer them there, or we are planning for some time at the end for a Q&A as well. For more information on this webinar series, please visit tpm-portal.com, navigate to Events in the main menu, and then select TPM Webinar Series. The AASHTO TPM portal will contain links to today's videos and slides, as well as previous webinar archives. So let's review the agenda for today's meeting. To start, Ms. Shadoni Smith-Jackson, Team Leader for FHWA's Performance and Asset Management, will provide FHWA's perspective on this topic. And then following that, Anna McLaughlin, the Program Director for Transportation Performance Management at AASHTO, will provide an overview of the Joint Task Force on the AASHTO Transportation Risk and Resilience Manual, a very important NCHRP project. Afterward, we'll have a series of short presentations on Resilience Improvement Plans, or RIPS. Our speakers will describe lessons learned, including unique approaches and applications beyond natural hazards. Specifically, Michael Simmons from Nevada DOT will talk about multidisciplinary stakeholder outreach. Stephanie Johnson from Delaware DOT will cover how DelDOT incorporated equity into their RIP. And Sandy Hertz from the Maryland DOT will address interdependencies related to resilience. Next, Monica Alamont-Smoot will present information on Texas DOT's Risk Community of Practice and Enterprise Risk Prevention and Management Program. And Jake Granholm will wrap up our presentations with a discussion of enterprise risk management and performance management at the Minnesota DOT. We will include a time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation, so feel free, like I said, to enter any questions you may have in the chat. And any questions that we did not get to during the webinar today, we'll respond to offline and post to the TPM portal event page after the webinar. So with that, let's start the program. First, as I mentioned, we'll hear from Federal Highway Administration's perspective on this topic from Ms. Shadoni Smith-Jackson. Ms. has over 20 years experience in transportation civil engineering, and in September of 2022, she rejoined Federal Highway Administration as the team leader for performance and asset management. There she manages TPM and asset management programs, including rulemaking, performance management, the performance management form, TAMP recertification and consistency determinations, as well as guidance and technical assistance development. All right, Mish, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jean. And thank you all for giving me some time this afternoon to talk to you a little bit about FHWA's work in the resilience area. As many of everyone knows, in 2021, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also called Bill, acknowledged the importance of resilience in transportation infrastructure by establishing for the first time a legislative definition of resilience and allocating funds for resilience considerations throughout the existing transportation systems and programs, which is quite a big deal to have a legislative definition which shows the importance of resilience in throughout the Federal Highway Administration. According to Bill, the resilience is defined as a project with the ability to anticipate, prepare for, or adapt to conditions or withstand respond to, or recover rapidly from disruptions. And it includes specific goals to resist hazards, reduce the magnitude or duration of impacts, and to decrease the project vulnerability to weather events or other national disasters. Throughout our agency, we are working to develop tools, resources, training courses, and materials for use in applications to increase resilience awareness and implementation throughout project development. We work with the states and metropolitan areas to increase the health and longevity of the nation's highways through assessing vulnerabilities, considering resilience in the transportation planning process, incorporating resilience in asset management plans, addressing it in project development and design, and optimizing operations and maintenance practices. After my talk, I'll drop a couple of links into the chat pod of some of the resources that we have available and may be of interest to this community. We've developed, as I mentioned, several tools and guidance for systemic consideration of climate risks at transportation system and project level. Many of you are familiar with our PROTECT program, the Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation. That's a mouthful, so we just say PROTECT. And you may not be as familiar with a effort that the Bureau of Transportation Statistics is undertaking called the Transportation Vulnerability and Resilience Data Program. I'll share a link for that as well. But that program is developing an all hazards approach in collaboration with local decision makers and collecting necessary data to compute resilience metrics. I bring that up because it's a different community that the BTS is reaching out to, and they're focusing on the resilience metrics to help local and regional agencies better incorporate resilience. So there are several new courses available through the National Highway Institute that are focused on resilience. There is a 2.5 to 3 day course. It's 2.5 days for inland locations and 3 days for coastal locations because there are additional considerations for coastal communities. But it's called Addressing Climate Resiliency and Highway Project Development and Preliminary Design. And there are a number of shorter free virtual courses that the NHI is also putting on. So I will provide that information also in the chat. But I'll summarize here, or I'll conclude here by saying that there are a number of efforts FHWA is undertaking to provide tools and additional resources on resilience. This is a focus area for my team, the Asset and Performance Management team, and you will see more information coming out shortly. And now I will turn it over to Anna for her talk.
Yeah, I can jump in, Mish. Thank you very much. And I'll introduce Anna. And next up is Anna McLaughlin from AASHTO. Anna is the Program Director for Transportation Program Management, and we are fortunate that she's our AASHTO staff liaison for the Committee on Performance-Based Management, and she's also responsible for managing the work with the Committee on Planning and the Committee on Data Management and Analytics. And in this position, Anna provides leadership on AASHTO's policy and technical activities related to transportation performance management, asset management, planning, and data management, all the good stuff. Anna will cover the Joint Task Force on the AASHTO Transportation Risk and Resilience Manual. Anna, welcome.
Thanks, Jean. You're totally right. It is all the good stuff. It's all the best stuff. And thank you. I'm excited to be here today. And we have amazing speakers lined up. I'm really excited to hear their presentations. But first, I'm going to keep it short and sweet, but I just wanted to give this group an update on this NCHRP project. Next, Lori. This is NCHRP 2332 is basically, we are developing a manual for risk and resilience, an AASHTO manual that state DOTs will be able to use to provide, the research is going to provide a science-based technical resource to assess risk and resilience in transportation planning, design, construction, operation, and maintenance decisions. This project kicked off just in January with the research team, and it's a multi-year project. The timeline we're hoping to get with the schedule, that we'll have a draft manual in 2026. This is a very large project that has, it's a big project with a lot of goals. It has a large budget. I think one of the highest budgets of an NCHRP research project at $3.5 million, and a timeline to get a lot of work done. So it is a very big project. Next, Lori. And because it is such a big project, we really want to make sure that we are supporting the research team and the panel, the NCHRP panel. AASHTO's created a joint task force to support this effort and this project. The two committees that are leading the task force are the Committee on Transportation System Security and Resilience and the Committee on Performance-Based Management. We have our fearless leaders, Tim Sexton of Minnesota DOT and William Johnson from Colorado DOT, leading this effort. And they are going to help us. Next slide, Lori. They're going to help us really make sure that the task force supports the development of the manual as it's going through the process, working with the research team. Oh, there we go. So the task force is supporting this effort. We want to make sure we have a really close relationship with the panel and the research team. So it's both the developing this manual, and then working on, after that's completed, working on implementation and then overall maintenance and support of this manual. We really want to make sure that we're developing a real tool that state DOTs can use and it can be value in this space. Next. Awesome. And these are really what the task force is going to be doing over many years. Providing direct and ongoing connection between the project panel, the research team, and our AASHTO committees. Where they're going to be providing their technical expertise, reviewing and coordinating comments, as well as being a sounding board and supporting the whole team, the research panel and the research team. So not a small charge at all for this committee. We have our leadership that we saw, Tim and William. We thank them very much. And we have a number of liaisons too with other partner agencies. And then you can see here the number of AASHTO committees that are serving on this task force. So it really is, these are both the committees and subcommittees. It really is a multidisciplinary, like cross-cutting group of subject matter experts that really are going to help us ensure that this manual is a really valuable tool. So again, this is kicked off. The efforts are just really starting on this. I think this Friday, we're actually having an industry roundtable to get feedback and have kind of a listening session. And I'm gonna have many more updates as we go on. So this is a project that is really important and is going to be ongoing. You're going to be hearing a lot about it. I hope you're as excited about this project as we here at AASHTO and the committees are, because we really think it's going to deliver us a really useful tool. If anyone has any questions specifically about the task force or the project, you can feel free to let me know, reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about it. But one place, and yes, next, Lori, and then just putting a plug in here, one place where we'll probably be talking about it again is in September in St. Louis. We will soon have registration up for our annual meeting. This year, we're meeting in conjunction with the Committee on Data Management and Analytics, as well as the Committee on Planning. And as we're kind of fleshing out the program, we're definitely hearing resilience is what people want to talk about and learn more about. So we're really excited about that. So mark your calendars and stay tuned for more information on that. And that's me. Thanks, Jean.
Thank you very much, Ann. I appreciate the plug for the conference and encourage everybody who's on today to really consider attendance and mark your calendars for sure. Also, thank you for the update on the task force. This is really, I would say, a very different effort than we've taken before for something this large. So I think it's to have this much engagement in that effort is really important, and also is going to lead to a very successful product. So I'm excited about it too. All right, and if you have any questions for Anna or Mish, you can certainly put those in the chat. So now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick Cowley from Utah DOT to introduce our state DOT speakers for today. Patrick is the Director of Transportation Performance Management at the Utah DOT. He's also the Secretary for the Committee on Performance-Based Management Subcommittee on Risk Management. Patrick, take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it, Jean. Thank you so much. As Jean mentioned, our first set of DOT presenters, we're going to cover the resilience improvement plans, but not just the whole plan itself, but some of the outcomes, focusing on lessons learned and applications beyond just natural hazards. This is going to be a little bit of a lightning round with this first set of presenters. So it's going to go pretty quick. So get your questions in, and we will in the chat, and we will try to get to those at the end of the three sets of presentations. Our first DOT speaker is Michael Simmons from Nevada DOT. Michael is a stormwater compliance manager who's partnered with internal and external stakeholders to successfully blend construction and maintenance operations with stormwater compliance. He knows the importance of providing, operating, and preserving a transportation system that enhances safety, quality of life, and economic development through innovation, environmental stewardship, and a dedicated workforce. He'll talk about Nevada DOT's stakeholder outreach related to his resilience improvement plan. Next, we'll hear from Stephanie Johnson. Stephanie is the director for Delaware DOT's Division of Transportation, Resiliency, and Sustainability, focused on improving the resiliency of their transportation network and the impacts climate change and sea level rise are having on Delaware's transportation infrastructure. In addition to infrastructure resilience, Stephanie is also responsible for the implementation and oversight of the department's carbon reduction strategies, the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan, and construction equity initiatives, and serves as the co-lead for asset management. She has quite a job there. And then third of all, we have Sandy Hertz from Maryland DOT. Sandy is the director of the Office of Climate Change Resilience and Adaptation within MDOT's Secretary's Office. She's been with the department since 2004 and brings over 25 years of experience in environmental protection to this position. In her current role, she coordinates climate resilience and adaptation efforts across Maryland DOT's multimodal transportation enterprise. Sandy will cover the RIP interdependencies. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Michael, and then right after, go into Stephanie and then Sandy. So Michael, it's all yours.
Hey, good afternoon. Mike Simmons from the Nevada Department of Transportation. Wanted to talk to you guys today about our stakeholder outreach as it relates to our resiliency improvement study. We kind of recognized pretty early on that stakeholder outreach was going to be important to the success of our plan, and not only internal but external stakeholders. And we needed to make sure that we included a multidisciplinary approach to that outreach. Everybody defines resilience a little bit different. So having multidisciplines involved in the development of your resiliency definition, it has a national definition, you know, AASHTO, FHWA, but everybody internally in your different municipalities views resiliency different. So you want to make sure you get your resiliency defined and align it with the goals of your plan. Multidiscipline approach gives you a holistic perspective on your plan. It helps to provide lots of different ideas and lots of outside the box thinking, you know, stuff that we would have never considered came up while we were discussing these plans with our stakeholders. They can help advise on decisions. It depends on how much control you want to give to your group. And again, it provides discipline specific technical input. So I may have some ideas. I may think I know how to implement it, but if you don't have that discipline specifically involved, then you're probably going to skip over some critical stuff. Next slide, please. we broke our outreach groups or applicant pool into 3 participant groups. We had a project management team, which was really responsible for driving the project. We had a steering committee that kind of kept us in the rails. And then we had the larger stakeholder group, which consisted of a variety of municipalities and people that touched us and were affected by our decisions and outcomes in different ways. Next slide. So our outreach approach, once we had sort of defined our stakeholder pool, we had to determine what their role or level of responsibility would be. You know, are they going to be informed? Are they going to be involved? Or are they just going to be aware of what we're doing? Some resiliency projects may be multi agency type things. It might be something that doesn't really benefit the DOT to do, but we have a regional transit commission that ties in with us, and it might have made sense for them to take the lead on some of that stuff. So keeping them in the loop and aware and informed of what we're doing, having the appropriate groups involved, because resiliency sometimes involves the use of assets that are outside of your control. So you want to make sure that you have those groups involved and informed as well. So having that different level of participation helps you, you know, get them squared away, involved, and feel like they have a voice in the process. So next slide. And then, so, you know, probably the biggest lesson that we learned is stakeholders need to be engaged early and often. In spite of the fact that we had a robust stakeholder plan, it could have been better. It costs money. It takes a lot of time to coordinate, especially the larger the groups get. Institutional on the ground knowledge. A lot of systems are legacy systems. A lot of the knowledge base is locked up in senior administrators and people who have been around for a really long time, but they're leaving. You've got to get all that out of them before they leave. And you need that to be incorporated into your resiliency plan. Pain points need to be identified before it's an oh my God moment late in the process and you really can't account for it or address it. The data, just gathering the data from the stakeholders is a monumental task. You better make sure that you've got the data that you need to process your models and to drive your resiliency plan into the future. If you don't have the data, you better figure out how to get it. It doesn't fall off trees. It can be very difficult to get. One thing that we noticed here in Nevada was we were looking for some specific floodplain data, and we're the driest state in the country. The data just didn't exist. So we were lucky to have a consultant running a parallel project that was able to help us out, but that can be a problem. So participation early and often will definitely ensure better outcomes. So that kind of covers real fast stakeholder outreach from the Nevada DOT's perspective.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Johnson from Delaware's DOT, and I will be talking about, as Patrick mentioned, how we have incorporated equity into our resilience improvement plan. We have come up with the creative name of DRIP. It's Delaware's Resilience Improvement Plan. So we fondly refer to it as our DRIP. We are asked to include our mission statement in every presentation that we provide, but I love including it in presentations specifically around the work we've done in equity, because our mission statement, as you see here, is excellence in transportation, every trip, every mode, every dollar, but specifically every one is where this equity focus work that we've done fulfills our mission statement, and it's something we're very proud of. Next slide. So as part of the Justice 40 executive order, in response really to that, and knowing that that order requires that we that overall benefits in disadvantaged communities, 40% of overall benefits in disadvantaged community are experienced in disadvantaged communities as part of Justice 40. We do not have a specific definition of where those communities are in our state. And so DelDOT took the initiative to identify those. The screenshot you see there is the USDOT tool that shows where disadvantaged communities are in Delaware. And if you know Delaware at all, you'll know that that large portion of orange that shows Bombay Hook, that is a predominantly national wildlife refuge. So the green specks that you see there are where people actually live. And so it is showing in their tool that that census block group is a disadvantaged area, but we know hardly anyone lives there. And so with barely more than 1 million people living in Delaware, we knew that we could do a better job of identifying our disadvantaged communities. And so that's the work that we undertook. We use data sets, including the residential land use land cover, which you see in the green, as well as census data, to be able to help make informed investment decisions, as well as provide data for strategic public outreach. Next slide. So the picture on the right shows you in the blue speckles that you see across our state where the disadvantaged communities are. We like to use positive language, so we call those equity-focused areas. And so we've been able to identify them at a very granular level. So you can see that across the state there. Our methodology is outlined there on that slide. I think what's good to note is that we included poverty, but we also recognize that people not in poverty, not considered in poverty, but outside of poverty still do struggle. And so we used a percentage of median household income as well. We include racial and ethnic minority groups, and then also included language isolation. Back to that portion of the state that I had previously referenced that was in orange, you can see there's very few disadvantaged communities in that location in our state. Next slide. So how we incorporated equity in our DRIP is we have our biggest challenge from an infrastructure resiliency standpoint is flooding. We're the lowest lying state in the country. And so flooding, whether it's tidal or inundation, coastal flooding, it is a significant threat to our infrastructure. And so we have had to prioritize the roadways that we've identified that frequently flood. And as part of that, you can see in this chart here that the equity focused areas is a component of that prioritization, and how we've weighted that in our prioritization methodology. Next slide. And so I just wanted to highlight how we are using equity, not just within our DRIP, but also in asset management. So on the left is the red segments show frequently flooded roadways. Those are the high priority locations that we'll be working on mitigation strategies for, and how they intersect with our equity focus areas. And then on the right, from an asset management perspective, we incorporated equity focused areas in our pavement management system. And so we're able to figure out and analyze what the level of performance of the pavement condition are in equity focus areas versus non-equity focus areas, and how they meet that state target of 75%. And so this is something that we're really proud of, and something that we are planning to incorporate and try to incorporate in other programs. If you'd like to learn more about the work that we're doing, we are part of the AASHTO Innovation Showcase that will be presented in at the spring meeting in Wisconsin. So, and my contact information is there. Thank you for this time.
Okay, I guess I'm up next. My name is Sandy Hertz, as Patrick mentioned earlier. I'm going to cover the approach that we took to our Maryland Transportation Resilience Improvement Plan. So ours is called the TRIP instead of the DRIP. So we're keeping the theme going here. Our Resilience Improvement Plan is a little bit different than maybe some of the other DOT plans, in that we took the approach of including all of our different modes of transportation. So just to kind of provide a little bit of a backdrop here, Maryland Department of Transportation oversees about 17,000 lane miles of road, about 171 miles of short line freight rail and commuter rail service. We have 2 airports. The most well-known one is Baltimore Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport. We also have over 700 miles of sidewalks, an international cruise terminal, 7 public cargo terminals for our port, light rail, toll facilities, commuter bus services, and local bus routes. And I'm sure I'm missing some. So for those from MDOT on the call, I apologize. But our Resilience Improvement Plan is meant to be a roadmap for a data-driven approach to investments in Maryland. We were looking to really focus in on critical infrastructure across those different modes, and to establish a framework where we can embed into our internal workflows at all of our different modes tools and decision support features that will help us include climate and extreme weather into all aspects of transportation system delivery. So project planning, design, investment, prioritization, and life cycle planning. Next slide. So this is just me trying to step you through the approach as we walked into the Resilience Improvement Plan. So this slide is just really showing the roads that SHA maintains. They're highlighted in red. And then it's probably not as easy to see, but there's a light or a thin blue line, and those represent the FEMA evacuation routes. So if we were just to include in our Resilience Improvement Plan kind of the basics and not include the other modes, next slide, we would miss a lot of the other infrastructure that is coincident even with our highway assets. So you're starting now to see the darker black lines, which shows some of our transit options. There's a gray line that indicates our light rail system. We have a tunnel in that area, and then we also have freight rail, as well as a portion of our port. It's one of our cargo auto handling facilities. Next. And then when we start to pull in some of the climate specific data into the Resilience Improvement Plan, we start to see how this is just a representation of coastal inundation. By pulling in the modeled climate ready action boundary, we have it was something that was produced at a state level for all agencies to be using. This layer indicates a 3-foot increase in sea level, and then it is projected out across the land using topography. So it's the red areas are areas that in the future show susceptibility to inundation. And my point in pulling in all of these different feature classes is that I've also now included freight routes. And you can see that there are a number of not just transportation assets that will be impacted if some of our roadways are flooded, but also ingress and egress from the communities that are located to the south of the Maryland Port Administration area. And then also just getting into and out of Harbor Hospital, which is one of the primary hospitals in Baltimore, becomes difficult. Next. So we continue to look at the way that our transportation system is also managed. We're a little bit different than a lot of some of the states in that we actually don't manage most of the lane miles of roadways in Maryland. Our state highway administration approximately, I think they manage approximately 25% of all lane miles in Maryland. So when we're talking about a resilience improvement plan, we really need to be thinking through who maintains that stretch of road, how is our relationship with them in terms of how do we coordinate on redundancy needs for emergency response if a certain part of our system is no longer able to be accessed because of flooding. Do we have the ability to push them off onto a city road or a county road? So this table here is showing that highlighted area in yellow. So at location 1, we are recognizing that the roadway maintenance in that area by Harbor Hospital is actually managed by Baltimore City. The road in there is, of course, giving access to the hospital. It's also part of the FEMA evacuation route. We do have some of our transit authority or transit administration bus routes also located on that main road. It provides access to our port facilities, and our in 2017 there was about 1,135 freight trucks going through there, and it's in an area that is not currently shown as vulnerable using that climate model data. But I've highlighted number 2. That is actually located where our harbor tunnel exists. And there is some vulnerability in that area for access to that tunnel. It's, again, it checks all the boxes that I just went over for location 1. It also has a much higher freight number on any given day. So lots of freight moving in and out, and it's vulnerable. And then location 3 is the area that our state highway administration does maintain that road. It also provides some of the access, as mentioned before, a lower amount of freight, but it's also not vulnerable. My point in showing this isn't to say, well, we would go to number 2 automatically, but more to just kind of demonstrate that if we're not thinking about resilience improvements from the standpoint of a system, whether that is linking to the Baltimore City Department of Public Works or another one of our peer modal administrations, and coordinating risk mitigation and resilience improvements through our plan, then we could unintentionally be impacting these other important community features, like getting to and from the hospital or getting to and from your home. Next slide. So just to kind of go over the lessons that we learned, defining resilience from an enterprise view. Many of the state DOTs have adopted the US DOT definition of resilience. I have submitted a draft policy statement to define resilience for Maryland DOT, and I'm hoping that it's going to be approved this year. We did mention it in our resilience improvement plan. In going through and developing our resilience improvement plan, we recognized that not all of our modal administrations had the same level of maturity in terms of understanding their vulnerabilities across their critical asset classes. So that is a gap in data that we recognize and will be working on filling. We also know that there are some workflows and requirements that are already built into the modes, like the TAMP and the state of good repair efforts that occur every single year that can be helpful towards project prioritization. And then one of the things that we're really trying to nail down, and I think it's also a really it's a nod to the tremendous work that the research team is doing on 2332 and the task force that Anna was covering earlier, really a need to identify consistent source data, both at the state and regional level for those natural hazard evaluations. And then also, as Stephanie mentioned in her presentation, a need to have, downscaled equity information for our states as well. So for those that may not have it, it's also very helpful. And then the last thing that we learned in pulling together the resilience improvement plan is that the modal threats, the threat asset pairs, they vary significantly. So heat, for example, extreme heat for highways may result in asphalt softening and getting rutting on the roadways. But at our airport, if it's extreme heat, it can actually impact airplane operations and may require the need to extend the runway in order to get the amount of lift required to take off. So there's like different, there are differing needs when it comes to critical infrastructure and natural hazards across our modal administrations. One last thing that I wanted to say, and I think I have one more slide maybe. Nope, I don't. This is my last slide. One last thing I wanted to say is just that at MDOT, what we're planning on doing is taking the work that we developed for our carbon reduction strategy, as well as the work from the trip, and combining them into an overall climate action plan for Maryland DOT. So that is where we're going to go next with our resilience improvement plan. And again, focusing on it from a system standpoint and not staying highway centric per se.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I appreciate it. And to Stephanie and Mike as well. We really appreciate your insights. Now we'll hear from Monica Alemán-Smoot at Texas DOT. Monica is a licensed attorney who had joined the Texas Department of Transportation, TxDOT, in October of 2008. She's a member of the TRB Tort Liability and Risk Management Committee and currently serves as the vice chair of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Risk Management. I get to work with her very closely, and she's becoming my Zoom buddy over time. We appreciate her service there. And she currently serves as the vice chair. And at TxDOT, she's the lead for the Risk Prevention and Management Program. She's the vice chair for the CPBM Subcommittee on Risk Management, as I mentioned. And Monica will talk about TxDOT's Enterprise Risk Prevention and Management Program and Risk Management Community of Practice for TxDOT. So Monica, over to you.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon about risk management in the Texas Department of Transportation. So if we can go to slide 3. There we go. So why is it important to manage risk? According to the AASHTO ERM implementation guide, managing risk at the enterprise level is important because it provides agencies with new insights and management analysis tools that increase the likelihood of achieving strategic objectives and complement strategic planning and performance management. So what is the Enterprise Risk Prevention and Management Program? As you can see on the slide here, it's an internal program. And since I'm from Texas, I always like to use kind of football terms there. I like to think of our program as the offense. So what we do in our program is we proactively identify agency-wide risks, and we do that with our starting point of looking at legal compliance. We look at the laws, rules, regulations, policies, and procedures that we are required to follow at TxDOT. We have these work group teams and we facilitate conversations with our subject matter experts. And then we analyze and prioritize risks by the significance of a risk and the probability of that risk occurring. We also assess current controls and then develop mitigation plans to reduce or eliminate the risks. So if you can go to slide 4. So now I'm going to give a little background on the program itself and historical context. So as I mentioned before, we started back looking at legal compliance first. We did that back in 2011 when the program was created. You can see what the basis was. We were just in the compliance office at that time. But then the program began to shift in 2015. We started looking at more, not just legal compliance, but we really started looking at also those opportunities for business process improvements, innovations, and efficiencies. And so right now the program is housed in our Strategic Initiatives and Innovation Division, and the program has been there since 2017. You can go to the next slide. Here's the process that we follow. So typically every spring we meet with our executive team, which consists of our executive director, our 2 deputy executive directors, our chief of staff, and our chief engineer. And we select the subjects that we will be reviewing that coming year. So when I mentioned before that we look at all the laws and rules and regulations, the way that we tackle that is by having these work group teams. So we have subject matter experts from our divisions and districts participate on those teams. So as I mentioned, we first start with meeting with executive team, and they help us to select the subjects we'll be reviewing. For example, we might have a contracts work group, safety work group, a planning and execution work group, a financial work group. So we pull those divisions and district subject matter experts together. And we always have a standing member of general counsel on that team as well. We form and train the work group. We have an orientation session. We then identify and prioritize those risks. And then at the end of the process, we meet with the affected division directors and leadership up to the chief level. And then our final stop is with that executive leadership team level. And what I love about our process is that we start with the employees, move up to management, and then executive leadership. So at the end of the process, when we've finalized and pulled all those mitigation plans together, it's a complete and total collaboration across the agency. So that's one of the things that I love about my job, is that I get to work with so many different folks at all levels of the organization. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So this just kind of gives some of the benefits and the value add of the program. As I mentioned before, it's that proactive approach and problem solving and coming together and solutioning. One thing that since TxDOT is a very large agency, is there are a few opportunities for the districts and divisions to come together, and these work group facilitations provide those opportunities for us to come together. And a lot of times what I find is that the divisions and districts are seeing things, but they get so wrapped up in their day-to-day jobs that they don't take that time to proactively look at that, the issues they're seeing. And so this provides that forum for them to do that. As I mentioned before, cross-functional collaboration, addressing those potential threats or risks before they become problems, increased safety measures, cost savings, and then improved public perception at TxDOT. Here, I'm just going to go through some of the examples of some of the work that we have done in the program. So one of the things that I feel like is one of the biggest takeaways that we were able to accomplish is our live captioning at commission meetings. We were in the middle of our corporate governance risk work group, and our civil rights division raised the issue of ADA compliance and started talking about, well, what can we do better as far as our meetings that we have? So at that same time, our legislature was in session, And there was a rider going through requiring state agencies to use live captioning. So because we were able to start talking about it in the work group, we were able to facilitate that discussion on the front end before the rider was adopted. And we worked through general counsel, communications, commission support, civil rights, our public involvement folks, environmental, and we were able to pull that together, and we were ready to launch that September 1 of that year. Another issue that we had was we were working with our maintenance team, and one of the things that they always get complaints about is the right-of-way and mowing. And so we started looking at the issue of vegetation management. Well, when we were looking at that, we realized that in our maintenance division, we were having a lot of new maintenance supervisors come up through the ranks that needed additional training. And so even though the work group itself and the division rated the risk low, we saw an opportunity there to proactively work on training, provide that for the new maintenance supervisors, and then also develop a campaign with our communications division to educate the public on why we do things in the manner that we do, whether it's planting seeds, using herbicides. We did a social media campaign. We put some decals on our trucks. We did some outreach to the public. So that's just another example of one of the deliverables of the program. Then we also looked at and worked with our rail division. They had some concerns concerning low ground clearance crossings. And so as we were looking at that issue, we knew that we needed to reach out to our district folks and also the Attorney General's office just to talk about liability and see what we could do to improve the situation. So worked with our general counsel and developed guidance for the districts to assist with some of those low ground clearance crossings they were seeing. Then another win that we had to do with our ferry operations. So our Galveston ferry team and our Port Aransas ferry team said that they were having some issues with individuals taking prohibited items onto the ferries. So we worked with general counsel, worked with communications, and developed some outreach, some literature for folks going onto the ferries, just to make sure and provide that awareness to improve upon the issue that the people in Galveston and Port Aransas were seeing. So just wanted to highlight some wins from the program there to give you a little bit more context of how that collaboration works across the agency. This here just shows kind of our level of work and what we do, and just our plan. So this past year, we reviewed safety, assets, and planning. We're going to be launching a big contracts review this coming year. We've also been working on AI risk and how that's going to look at the agency. We created our risk management community of practice, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. And these are just my work with AASHTO and TRB and some other work efforts that we have. Okay, if we can go to the next. So here I'm going to talk about the risk management community of practice. And this is something I'm very excited about. I was very excited about our launch in December. One of the things that the AASHTO Enterprise Risk Management Implementation Guide discussed was the importance of having a community of practitioners to help promote risk management. And as our program has launched additional efforts and work efforts, including through scoping projects that yielded deliverables such as dashboards, metrics for impact, process flows, the management of enterprise level projects, and the creation of the risk framework for AI, just really demonstrated to me that there was an appetite there and there was a need for us to unify the risk practitioners across the agency. And so with that, we created the risk management community of practice at TxDOT. You can see the purpose there and just some of our goals. And it's really all about that knowledge sharing and increasing that risk management culture and appetite at TxDOT to grow that. So we can go to the next slide. So how did I start the effort? So once I started noticing kind of the additional projects that we were launching and working with my peers across the agency, I decided I needed to kind of get that buy-in. So I reached out to other risk practitioners in the agency and began asking for feedback from them and then leveraging that from the divisions and the districts. I then presented my idea to my division leadership and then finally our executive leadership for approval to move forward. Worked with communications to create an invitation, thought about ways to advertise the risk management community of practice, came up with the idea of using risk champions to identify folks in the divisions that were risk practitioners or had a strong interest in risk management. And then the other individuals, we call them the collaborators, the risk collaborators. So we try to kind of encourage that participation amongst the divisions and districts. And so at our first meeting, what we did was we always like to kind of have an activity to bring people in. And so we launched a word bubble activity for the folks on the call. And this is what they came back with as far as how they see what does risk mean to them. So we thought that was a really good way for people to start thinking about risk. And as you can see there, we had 95 participants on the call. And then we had the representation, which I was really excited about, 33 divisions, 17 districts, and then we have 17 risk champions. So the other thing that we're looking at is we're looking to create our charter and formalize this, and that's going to hopefully happen within the next week or so. We have our second meeting scheduled March 28th, and we'll be talking about pillars of risk management and looking at threat versus opportunity and how that works. But really, this was something that I was really excited about. I've seen risk management grow at TxDOT since I very first started back in 2011. And just seeing the different risk practitioners and that culture at TxDOT grow has been really exciting. And I'm really excited to continue working in this risk management community of practice at TxDOT. So that's all I have. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Monica. Our final presenter today is Jake Granholm from the Minnesota DOT. Jake manages a team in MnDOT's Performance, Risk, and Investment Analysis Group, delivering strategic planning, risk management, and performance management activities at MnDOT. He serves as the lead planner for several performance management efforts, including MnDOT's Performance Dashboard and an annual transportation system performance report. He also supports MnDOT's enterprise risk management initiatives, such as scenario-based risk assessments and facilitating an enterprise risk management steering committee. Jake is going to talk to us about enterprise and performance management, enterprise risk and performance management at MnDOT. Jake.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. I feel affirmed by Monica's presentation because a lot of the words and phrases that she used, I use too. So I feel like I'm in the right place. So yeah, my name is Jake Granholm. I appreciate you all having me here. I am the Performance and Risk Supervisor within our Performance and Risk and Investment Analysis unit in our central office here in Minnesota at MnDOT. So today, I'm going to briefly describe MnDOT's approach to enterprise risk management and enterprise performance management. I'll do them both separately and then bring them together to describe how we've worked on integrating them. So first, enterprise risk management, for us, it offers a structure in which to identify, assess, and manage uncertainty and variability in Minnesota's transportation system. By organizing how we think about risk and performance, we're able to more efficiently allocate scarce resources, enhance decision-making processes, and manage our risks to work towards our performance objectives. So the enterprise risk management process in use at MnDOT began about a dozen years ago. We've had one for longer, but the current version has been in place for about a dozen years. And at the time, several years ago, MnDOT had what actually had a chief risk officer position. And that structure was directly informed by AASHTO's Guide to Enterprise Risk Management. Since then, to better meet needs and be more nimble, enterprise risk management responsibilities have been incorporated into my performance measures and risk units. The idea is to keep the risk management strategies close to the performance measure activities because there's so much crossover and inherent integration. So our team serves as internal consultants and conveners on risk and performance management topics. So at MnDOT, there was an internal push to more overtly incorporate risk management into various project, program, and strategic processes as a way to grow our maturity in risk management. So this is an overview. We look at risk management at 3 main levels. At the enterprise level, which is the highest level, we utilize risk in managing agency internal controls, as well as ensuring that we're moving toward meeting our agency's stated strategic objectives and managing the associated risks. Our senior leadership team uses a risk register that identifies and defines major risk categories, which enables managing and responding to risks for agency objectives. The risk register that we have, and I'll get to more of that in a little bit, is revisited about every 2 or 3 years to confirm that our agency's highest strategic risks are identified. And then one level down, we have program, products, and services level. This is that in between the district level and our enterprise level. So we utilize risk management at a program level in the development of agency policies through tools such as scenario-based risk assessments. The risk assessments help us better understand impacts of agency policies to business practices and to our stakeholders. And then at the project level, which I'm not going to get into today, we have, for example, required state road construction risk management processes. So project managers, at the commencement of every project, there is a risk process that gets put into motion as well. So there's a project manager or a project risk management team that develops a risk register to document the risks throughout the life of a project and then actively manage them. And then project teams continue to manage those risks to help maintain the project budget and stay on scope and within the time frame. So one other aspect, we also have a enterprise risk management steering committee. And that group is there to do a number of things. So the scope has included active management of risks to the agency, working with leadership and staff. We've also worked on aligning risk-based decision-making across the organization. With direction from the current committee chair and the agency leadership, we've been in the process of actually moving the committee towards more curation of risk topics for our senior leadership team, assessing whether identified risks and risk responses align with our strategic objectives, and also reviewing and updating the ERM framework on a regular basis. So the framework that we use as an agency, that group helps to review and discuss and refine it. This is, I made a reference to the enterprise risk register briefly. The current set of risks described by our enterprise register have been in place since about 2018. This is just an example on screen, the visual that we use. So to develop the risk register, MnDOT senior leadership team participated in a risk rating exercise. So they used existing strategic objectives to guide the process. And then we formally identified MnDOT's agency risks to better coordinate and align with risk assessments required by external partners and state plans. The risks were synthesized into one register, and then it's intended to be a living document. So on screen again, this is an example of an early risk rating exercise. So we had the participants rate MnDOT's ability to influence a given risk over the next 2 to 4 years, and then also its threat criticality. So on the grid, as you move higher toward the top right corner, it's the higher MnDOT's ability to influence, but also the higher the threat, the risk and the threat to MnDOT. So you can see ones that kind of stand out there: infrastructure resilience, inclusive public engagement, inclusive workplace, multimodal safety, workforce stability. Probably no surprises to those on the call here. A lot of the same ones that other state DOTs and other transportation organizations deal with, but those are ours. So all that, as I said, was consolidated into one risk register. And just briefly, for your reference, these are our 12 current top line enterprise risk categories. I won't go through all of them, but just so you can see them on screen as a reference, we have them there, and they all tie to a strategic objective that MnDOT's focused on. So these are the risks that would prevent MnDOT from achieving or effectively working towards those strategic objectives. So you can see those risks there, and I'll get into a couple of them in a bit here. So now I'm going to briefly talk about our enterprise performance management practices. And I want to touch on this so I can then tie these things together. So we use a handful of monitoring tools to monitor and report agency performance. There's a lot out there, and I'm just going to highlight the ones that we mostly use as a team. So and we use these tools to help report to our various stakeholders. So there's an annual performance scorecard directed toward our senior leadership team that is produced every year. We produce an annual transportation systems performance report for our Minnesota legislative audience. We also have a web-based performance tool that is beginning to serve as a central hub for our performance information. So we have a dashboard out there that's just been relaunched. And there's also ongoing analysis and research that contributes to our performance reporting. So these, ideally, these all align and are telling the same general story about MnDOT and what MnDOT's doing and how well we're doing, but for different audiences and different platforms and mediums. So now I'm going to get to this integration piece. I want to talk about how we've tried to bring these things together. So as I should note, as many of you are probably aware, the flow of responsibility as I talk about these things is not always cleanly delineated as I have on screen, but I wanted to boil this down a bit to describe the concept. So conceptually, this is how we work. Obviously, in day-to-day practices, things aren't always as streamlined, but it's always our goal. So thinking about the enterprise level as our main example here, the steps we go through, so these are our general steps for risk management: identifying and assessing the risk context, assessing risk and further defining the context through some different processes, identifying risk responses and risk management strategies, and then performance reporting that helps us loop back and provide a communication feedback loop for how we're doing. So those are the main points in the process. So I'll unpack those a little more for us. So at the highest level, we have a Minnesota Go 50-year vision, and that is supported by our major document is the statewide multimodal transportation plan, the SMTP. It's a 20-year plan. We also have a strategic plan with objectives, and then we have our risk register. Those are our core guiding documents at an enterprise level. As a side note, the SMTP document also establishes performance measures and performance targets for us to meet that guide further documents. So the next phase to the right, we have a handful of leadership committees and management groups that will assess risks and provide further context. They may also have their own risk assessments to help establish priorities. Moving one more to the right, our modal plans, investment plans, and business plans are where risk responses and management strategies are typically defined. Plan development can also help adopt or revise performance measures as well as identify performance targets. And then the plans really ideally integrate performance planning and risk management to move toward improved outcomes. And then performance and risk monitoring for that part, we have, as I mentioned, we monitor performance through a number of tools, such as our dashboard website, annual scorecard, and formal reports. And then the fourth piece is communicating the performance management back to the public, our senior leaders, and other relevant stakeholders. So ideally, that's a continuous loop. And we're always working on ways to identify gaps and correct those gaps, but that's ideally how the process flows. One way this integration has been documented is through MnDOT's ERM risk summaries working paper. Essentially, this is an executive summary of our performance and risk management strategies. I'm going to use this structure today for two examples to synthesize how our approaches to risk management and performance management work together. So for each risk register category that I referenced, there's a summary that describes the risk context, the strategic connections to different plans and different groups that are relevant, performance measures for tracking progress, and also establish performance outcomes if they exist. I'm going to briefly highlight two examples so you can see more what that looks like. The first one, this actually fits to some of the themes I'm familiar with during this meeting. I'm going to talk about resilient infrastructure. So this risk category is partly defined in our working paper through opportunities and threats. So for infrastructure resilience, there's an opportunity to shift the focus to building and maintaining infrastructure that is more resilient to external forces like climate change, while one of the threats is infrastructure that is increasingly vulnerable to climate change and requires more resources to maintain and repair, while also potentially causing travel disruptions. So those are our opportunities and threats, how we define them. And then the risk summary working paper will lay out for people that want to know the risks within this category are assessed through our senior leadership group, as well as specialty offices, the districts and asset management office. There are also several source materials that outline strategies and report progress, including MnDOT's Transportation Asset Management Plan, or its TAMP. And we have several other reports too. So those relevant source materials all provide the setting the context and establishing strategies, which then again provide a feedback loop for relevant decision makers. And then the last bit here, again, this is the monitoring performance part. We monitor the performance and effectiveness of risk response strategies through our enterprise performance products, as well as through reports and plans to create a feedback loop. So we look at performance measures like pavement conditions and bridge inspections. We also might look at other things such as the percent of light fixtures on this roadway system using LEDs. We're also we do report through sources like our TAMP. We report ITS asset performance as well, expect the life expectancy of those things. And we're always trying to iterate on those things. So ITS is an example. We're trying to find ways to report at a granular level, but also at a rolled up level that also is informative. So we're trying to split that difference where we're providing valuable information that's not so granular that decision makers don't need a technical manual to understand, but also not so high level that it becomes meaningless. So we're always trying to find ways to report on performance in a way that's meaningful and provides an accurate story of what's going on. And again, there's a feedback loop through various reporting materials that we provide. The other example I'll highlight that's in the working paper is a more internally focused one, and that's workforce stability. I'm sure, again, many people here on the call are very familiar with workforce turnover within our transportation agencies, and the struggle and the challenge with finding talented people and hiring them and then getting them to stay for a long-term period. So this is the opportunity for MnDOT here is efficiently filling open positions and proactively preparing for employee turnover. And then the risk that we're experiencing is an increasing number of positions that remain unfilled, which could impact knowledge transfer and also service delivery. So again, this is outlined in our working paper so that our strategies are clearly described and the context is understood. Here's where we talk about assessing and identifying the risk responses. We have a number of leadership teams that work on this issue. We also have a relatively new workforce planning council that is addressing this issue head on. And then we have several source materials. So it can vary. Our human capital report that we get from another state agency, our MnDOT office business plans, internal data reporting systems, our strategic operating plan all provide a source for information that we can draw from. And then we look at tracking performance. So examples of performance reporting include, we might look at employee turnover rates or the percent of staff who are retirement eligible in a given year. Those are things that are tracked and monitored, and then we work on reporting information back. So there are several internal structures that exist to report information back to relevant stakeholder groups. And there are also some that are in the process of being solidified as well. So it's not all, there are gaps, and we're working on filling those gaps. The last thing I want to say here is that obviously our work is at various phases of development. Ideally, we're continuing to mature our risk management and performance management practices. And like I've mentioned a couple of times here, there are always gaps we're trying to identify and work toward filling. So some things are working as we planned, and some things that we planned are not working that way. So we have to go back and iterate on those. But there's always the things that are in progress, which gives us no shortage of work to do. So a few of our in progress or in plan next steps for our own purposes. We're currently working on actually revising and updating our enterprise risk register category. So with our ERM steering committee, we're working on reevaluating those risk categories and seeing which ones have become more critical, which ones have been effectively managed, so they can take a step back potentially, and we can focus on something else. We're also going to be updating those MnDOT risk summary working papers so that they reflect the risk register themselves and our current strategies. With the MnDOT ERM steering committee, we're working on updating its scope to better reflect current needs. Over the course of time, what the committee is focused on, it changes. So we're trying to adapt and make sure that the committee is as nimble as possible to respond to the needs that we have. And then we're also using our newly launched MnDOT performance dashboard as a as a central hub for reporting performance measures as it relates to risk management and other topics. So that's our newly developed thing that we're also working on. Those are our next steps. I appreciate the time. That's just a very brief overview of how we try to address things. And I appreciate the time to talk about it and share what we're doing. And I really appreciate hearing what others are doing as well. So thank you for the time.
Thank you so much, Jake. We were fortunate enough to have Jake come and talk to our subcommittee on risk management this past month in February. And he did such a great job. We wanted to hear from him again. So thanks, Jake. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Speaking of the enterprise risk management, I don't know how many of you knew that AASHTO has also stood up an enterprise risk management portal for us, the erm-portal.com, the ERM portal, where you can go and where we want to make it a community where we can talk about all things enterprise, program, project risk. And we've also got some resilience improvement plans, or for Stephanie, the DRIP, and for Maryland, Sandy, the TRIP. We want to have all of that information there on that erm-portal.com. And I'm going to add, oh, thank you very much. This is exactly it. And our subcommittee on risk management, we have a site on there where we actually put in all of the information on the subcommittee meetings and whatnot. So go and check it out. If you're interested today in what you heard, we'd love to have you join us for that community. With that shameless plug over, I will go ahead and turn it back over to Jean for the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick, and I appreciate that you mentioned the ERM portal. That was a great segue coming off of the presentations. Thanks to all of our presenters again. Fantastic presentations and very informative. So up next, we'll address some Q&A. Let's see, as Lori has been putting in the chat, if you have any questions for any of our presenters or anything around the topic of risk management and performance, you can put it into the chat. We'll be monitoring that. Or you can raise a hand and unmute yourself. I'm not seeing any questions yet. But why don't I go ahead and maybe ask our presenters, Stephanie and Michael, and I believe Sandy had to leave to actually go lead another subcommittee. So here's a question for you both. So what advice would you give states that are maybe less mature in their development of their RIP at this point? I know everybody kind of feels like we're all kind of growing in a maturity, even the states like you all that are probably further along than maybe some of us feel like we are. But what do you have any specific advice, any approaches to take?
I'll just say from Delaware's perspective, you know, the funding that we've received for Protect is a game changer. So it's been, it's great to be able to have funding specifically outlined to address resiliency for our transportation infrastructure, as I mentioned, specifically our frequently flooded roadways. So unfortunately, even with what we've been so generously given, it's never going to be enough, right? And so being able to have a prioritization process and working through that, and also being able to show, you know, visualize how we've done that, and have that mapping tool. We use GIS through Esri to do that, but that helps us to communicate to different communities and stakeholders of our process, of how we're tackling resiliency and our frequently flooded roadways in our state. And, you know, I think it helps communicate, and it's well received.
Thank you, Stephanie. Michael, how about you?
Nevada is fairly new to the resiliency landscape. And looking around and doing a little bit of research in the way that other states have done it, I would recommend that you kind of have to get your house in order as to where resiliency is going to reside. Some states have it reside in their environmental department or division. Some have a separate office that's just responsible for resiliency. There are pros and cons, obviously, to all of those different platforms for how to do resiliency, but making sure that you get everybody on the same page about how it's going to not only be developed out, but how it's going to be implemented. There are a lot of ideas for it. In our state, we're trying to get it, I think, to the planning group. But again, you've identified the risk, you've set things in motion, identified corridors and places where you can implement resiliency strategies. Now you have competing interest with long-term planning that kind of compounds the problem of getting it put into place in practicality. So you kind of need to have that squared away, in my opinion, in order to have a successful resiliency plan.
Really good points. Yes, absolutely. I know all of us it looks different in every state DOT, but thinking about how it then fits in with the rest of the program and all of the other competing needs is really important as well. So I'm going to jump to a question that I got in the chat, and that's from Monica. It's what product is TxDOT using for AI, if you would want to share that.
We are still in the infancy stage. We actually have a working session with ITD, our Information Technology Division, on Monday. So we're still working through that process. And so we're still kind of in the infancy stage, but starting to kind of pull together a risk framework and governance. So we don't have anything yet, as far as I've been told, but we're definitely working towards what we plan to do as an agency.
Thanks, Monica. I appreciate the thoughtfulness on the approach there. Okay, this is a question for Jake. Was it a natural connection between enterprise risk management and performance management? Your presentation makes it seem pretty seamless. And, I know that there's more to the story than that usually. And being that we're both from MnDOT, we know a little bit more behind the scenes, but maybe you can fill us in on some of that.
Good question. And yeah, actually, I mean, Gene, I could defer to you too, because you were involved in these conversations over the years as well, very directly involved. But I think it's a little of both, right? I think these processes can develop by themselves in independent tracks over time, but then it just takes kind of naming the connection, right? I think part of it is just like naming, like we're already doing a thing, we're doing risk management, we're doing performance management, and one is complementing the other. It's just more overtly naming it. That is, I think, a good challenge that I've keyed on before at MnDOT is that a lot of our risk management processes are so built into just the process of doing the work that we do that sometimes talking about them and pulling them out is a little more abstract process. So pulling them out to identify them is actually harder because they are so embedded. But to the point, I think there is a natural integration, because if you start with your strategic objectives, what are you trying to accomplish as an organization? What gets in the way of what would get in the way of achieving those objectives? Those are the risks. And then how do you know whether or not you're actually moving toward those objectives or achieving what you're trying to do? And that's the performance management. So it's naming what you're doing. So they do naturally kind of align when you're thinking about how ultimately what you're trying to do is achieve a strategic objective. And then again, so what's going to hinder that? Those are the risks. And then how do you know whether or not you're moving towards those goals? And that's the performance management. And so you can create that loop in that way. That's at least how I envision it in the framework, and that's kind of how we've built our framework as well. But that's one way to look at it, is to name it that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and thanks for explaining it that way too. And in fact, the Enterprise Risk Management Guide, the AASHTO guide, actually shows a picture of that, a graphic of it, of basically kind of a yin-yang relationship between performance and risk. So I think you described it very well. Thank you. Okay, so Monica, another question for you. How often are meetings planned for the community of practice? And are there any in-person meetings in the cards, and what will a typical agenda typically look like for your community of practice?
So the way that we've structured it in our division, we have other communities of practice. We have our Tableau community of practice. We have an innovation community of practice. And so we are all structured similarly in that we typically have our meetings quarterly. They have been virtual, but there is options for in-person as well. Like I said, we just launched in December, so our next meeting is next Thursday. And our agenda, we typically have, a welcome or an open. We have our safety moment. And then we typically have some sort of activity or icebreaker. That way to kind of bring folks into the discussion and make them feel a part of the community and kind of, spawn that collaboration that I talked about. And then, as I mentioned before, since we are just launching this, I really see this kind of, as a teacher, as a foundational year, trying to kind of grow what is risk, how do we define it, what tools can any person that works at TxDOT use to help them in their job. So starting with that pillars of risk for our next meeting and looking at kind of a SWOT analysis, how to do that. What does that mean? Because anybody could take that regardless whether they're a risk practitioner or not. They work in contracts, if they work in the engineering side, they can just start to think in those terms. So really we're looking to kind of provide that foundation this first year, but super excited about our participation rate right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm really impressed by it, actually. And I think you're right that the foundation, setting that foundation, getting everybody on the same page really is the first and foremost activity for risk, especially. It feels a little bit different to everybody until you start having those conversations.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so maybe one more question for Michael and Stephanie. Obviously, Nevada and Delaware, very different states. So in your approaches, were you able to leverage any existing plans or state or national data sets in the development of your RIPs? And if so, which ones?
So we were in a competition to get our RIP out as quick as possible. We always have friendly competition with our neighboring states, especially Sandy there in Maryland. And we are the first state, so we try to do things first. So what we didn't necessarily have framework that we referenced, but we did utilize the expertise of a consultant that we had selected to help guide us through the process. We had already established some resiliency and sustainability practices within the department. My predecessor, Jim Pappas, and I had been working as kind of our part-time jobs on resilience and sustainability initiatives. And so with the Protect funding and with the creation of this division, we were able to really focus our efforts and be more strategic about our approach to resiliency. And, as mentioned during this meeting, resiliency is multifaceted, but because we have to prioritize things and because of the funding that we do have available, our focus right now is specifically on our transportation infrastructure from the Protect standpoint, but obviously through performance management and through asset management, which I'm a co-lead with Maureen Kelly, who is also on this call today. We obviously recognize the other risks to the department as well.
Great, Michael, how about you?
And so for us in Nevada, couple of things as we got into the process, we did a literature review as part of our study, and that included reviewing a bunch of the design guides and things that we do internally. And of course, it's kind of the same story with every state. There's a lot of resiliency and redundancy built into the construction and maintenance activities that we perform day to day, but they're not formalized into a resiliency plan. So one of the things that needed to be done was to identify that, to help get some of that into the, into the study and into the plan. In terms of data sets, our consultant that helped us with ours leveraged the USGS data sets, referenced a number of different floodplain modeling data sets throughout the state, including some stuff that they were doing on the side for some other groups that fed right into ours. Earthquakes, when you get ready to start doing things, if you're in an area prone to landslides and avalanches and things like that, you're probably going to want to have some access to some geotechnical data. We didn't get that far down the road. Our initial foray was pretty limited in terms of natural hazards. But if you're going to get into those, there are plenty of data sets out there to be able to leverage and to use, and you just have to have the time and the money to go get them, and then you really need them to be formatted correctly. We got a lot of data from USGS regarding earthquakes. A lot of the data we couldn't use, and some of the data was so expansive that it really crashed the modeling system that we were trying to use. So that's something else to be aware of, is not everybody's using data sets that are compatible with what you want to do. And there might be a lot of data there, but it might not make sense for what you're trying to incorporate.
Yeah, that's absolutely true as well. All right, thank you both for answering that question. And I think that's all the time we have for questions today. So just a reminder, if there are any other questions that happen to come into the chat, we'll post those, and we'll post any answers as well onto the TPM portal website. So this concludes our webinar for today. You can see we have some upcoming webinars posted on the slide there. Thank you again to AASHTO, to FHWA, and to all of our speakers today. And we also want to thank our audience for your active participation and input. And then again, materials from today's webinar will be posted to the TPM portal at tpm-portal.com. I want to put a plug in to encourage all of you to attend the next Subcommittee on Risk Management meeting. It's scheduled for Monday, April 8th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you want to be invited, but you're not a member of the subcommittee already, feel free to put your name in the chat, and Anna will send you a meeting invitation. Or I think Anna also might put a link to the meeting in the chat as well. We hope you'll be able to join us in 2024 for TPM Webinar 22, scheduled for May 15th, 2024 at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the rest of our 2024 TPM webinar offerings. Please help us continue supporting this webinar series and other capacity building activities by signing up for the Technical Service Program, the TSP. And stay tuned for more information and registration coming soon for the AASHTO 2024 Conference on Data Management and Analytics, Planning and Performance Management. That's the one in September in St. Louis. We greatly appreciate you joining us today, and we hope to see you next time. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and please stay safe. Thank you.